Welcome to the Zero Input Agriculture podcast. I'm your host, James Simonson, and today we are talking to Jason Howard, a basil breeder. Never thought you were going to meet one of them from the
Yeah,
United States of America. So let's just jump right into it. Can you tell us a bit about your background and the path that led you to breeding this particular crop?
I think just a quick overview of, I've been into agriculture since I was young. My parents are avid gardeners. My grandparents were, one of my youngest memories is picking a beet out of the garden. So ever since, been gardening, throughout my life. And I've been growing basil since high school. And then it was when I was in college, I actually studied physics in college, but I was growing in a community garden and I was growing some basil, and I grew some purple and green basil beside each other. Don't know really much more about which type of purple and green. And I just decided to get into seed saving, and I replanted. I got polka dotted basil. I was like, wow, this is the coolest thing ever. And ever since then, I've just been planting basil beside each other. I always do open pollination. Basil is an outbreeder. In the wild, it's an outbreeder. That's why it's so diverse in the world, is that it outbreeds naturally. So it's always cross pollinating and producing new varieties just naturally. And so I would just scour the internet for every seed I could get, and I would keep introducing more and more diversity to my crops. And I never really was that interested in breeding strains, really. There's only one that I was kind of been doing for a while. It's only recently that, because of trying to meet market demand, I try to breed, strains, or I always breed seed mixes. I would just have a bunch of plants and I would go through and pick out, seeds from the mix and replant the mix. And I would name ones each generation, but they were more like individual plants. I wasn't naming a strain. It's almost like I named the individual plant. And I just got really into the extreme diversity of Asimum, and I've been learning more about Asimum. At first, it was mostly Asimum basilicum species, but then recently I've been getting into other Asimum species, particular Asimum africana. Recently, I guess we can discuss more of those later. But so I kept breeding, I kept growing plants, and even in graduate school, I was always kept a good crop of them. I love basil tea, so I'd love to grow these really diverse, unique flavored basils, and I would be harvesting. And when my wife met me, she was so interested in finding this guy who had these like jars of all these strange basils, in his cabinet. And then I went to Argonne National Lab, and after my PhD in physics, and they had a garden club, and I was growing there. I would breed my basil there, take my lunch break, pick some basil tea, and that's what helped get me through those long days. A nice relaxing cup of basil tea, ease the mind, punch on the keyboard, try to find some information out of all that coal energy. And then COVID hit. Job market was kind of low for the computational people. Lots of simulators, but not many jobs. And I was talking with my friends, and what am I going to do? I was like, I think I'm going to be a basil farmer. And I chose a teaching job. It keeps me in touch with physics, but it also gave me a chance. The summers off, came back to North Carolina. I had my parents' property to do my work on, and in the last couple of years is where I've really been scaling up and growing a lot more plants than I have before, which is fun. This year I have around 1,000 plants. Last year I had more. I had about last year was still about 1,000 breeding plants. I tried to do some marketable Thai and fresh Italian basil, but downy mildew kind of did them in. And here we are today, just trying to push the limits of basil hybridization, just crosses on top of crosses, year after year.
Now, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but can we take a little while to talk about the genus? So you pronounce it
Yeah,
Ocimum. I think
yeah,
I normally
some,
call it Ocimum, but it's one of these things where so many of
yeah.
us read plant books independently without having anyone to talk to. So
Well,
it's very common for names to be pronounced slightly differently by different people. It's a
I don't
genus
have a
of like
formal education in taxonomy, and I'm from North Carolina, so that could
Latin's dead
affect the.
language, so yeah,
Yeah,
there's leeway in how you pronounce it. So no one should ever feel
yeah,
embarrassed that they say
yeah,
a Latin name slightly differently, because
yeah,
you look around the world and everyone has their own kind of takes on
mhm,
different things, because
yeah,
it's not much of a spoken language most of the time. It's
yeah.
usually a written language, so that's fine. But it's a genus of what, about 30 species, I think?
Well, I've read pushing 60.
Yeah, yep, yep. And pretty much all of them have some degree of aromaticity. Like they're all
Yeah,
interestingly flavored. Not always nice to eat. Some of them are quite
yeah,
intense.
yeah. A lot of them are hard to get info on. Most of them exist in Africa, and there's only a couple rare photographs of them here and there.
Mm.
Some of them just dating back to someone, just a dried picture of a plant in a book. So most of them hard to get really much information on.
Mm. And people are very familiar with them being used as a fresh leaf herb,
Yeah.
particularly like the sweet
Mhm.
Italian strains of basil that are quite
Mhm.
mild compared to a lot of their
Yeah, that's
ancestors.
for sure.
Now, they're an interesting vegetable or plant product because they don't dry very well. Like a lot of other herbs, you can dry them down and then they're much more robust and easy to transport. But if you want to use basil properly, it needs to be fresh.
Yeah.
So that's something that makes it quite unusual compared to other herbs in its family.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of medicinal uses for basil as well. Do you want to briefly talk about what you know about those?
Yeah, I mean, people around the world use basil for a variety of medicinal purposes. I mean, ranging from it's hard for me to list them all, but a common one is you know, people. Most people in the world find that basil is good for mood-related things. And this is somewhat of a subjective thing, but people just find basil makes them feel better. You smell,
Hmm.
but just smelling basil. It's an aromatic. You just smell it. It makes your mood boost up. You drink the tea, can ease anxiety or stress. I find that. I mean, I'm not making any advice about anything, but I find that basil eases stress. Just me personally.
I think
People,
Indian Tulsi basil is probably the best example of that, where it's termed an adaptogen.
yeah,
It just makes you a bit more capable of dealing with the slings and arrows of life, is the way it's believed to work.
yeah, yeah. That's true. I find there's plenty of others that could do the same thing. Uh, peop, uh, People find it useful for inflammation related things, and there's reason to believe that that's true based on the chemical science of the compounds in basil. I can't pronounce the name. It's like beta carotenoid or something like that. It's a cannabinoid
Hmm.
that binds to the CB2 receptor, which uh, the basil has that in there. So
And
what are some other? I know.
have you ever had the opportunity to apply fresh basil to a bee sting? Like you have to do it within the first like minute, but its anti-inflammatory power is
Yeah.
really demonstrated when you use it that way.
No, I'm not, but I did have this bad sports injury one time, a inflammatory injury of the pelvic bone, osteotitis pubis, where like the joint that fuses the pubic bone together gets an inflammation, a chronic inflammation, and
Oh,
I was like drinking basil like crazy, and I don't know, I found that it was helpful personally.
interesting. And of course, some antimicrobial properties as well too, which are pretty common to that whole family of the salvia and mint family.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, people do claim that. I'm not as sure about the efficacy, but it could definitely help. You know, the plant itself produces those to defend itself from microbes. It's producing the essential oils to defend itself from microbes. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that it could be true. Whether it could be used to treat an infection, I'm not quite sure.
And there's one other big use of basil that often gets overlooked in the West, of basil seed. Have you
Oh yeah, yeah,
experimented
yeah,
with that
definitely.
much?
Yeah, I just recently got into that. For example, most people don't think of Afghanistan as a basil country, but they produce the most basil seed. Maybe they're one of the top producers of basil seed in the world for eating. People make drinks with them. It's very nutritious. It has a lot of the omega fatty acids in there, mineral content. So they make like in the Middle East, across Asia, they make like a seed drink. They mix the seeds with water and it like they gel up into like almost little frog eggs
Mm.
and you can drink them. I experimented with it recently. It's quite good. I just went to the local ethnic market and there was an Indian brand, just a bag of basil seeds that obviously they were bred differently. They're very large seeds
Mm.
and they gel up much bigger than ones I experimented with for my own seeds. So they've also obviously been bred for the eating purpose.
It's just amazing that you can take one genus and you can
Yeah,
develop it in so many different directions.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, definitely.
Moving on, do you want to talk about what your local growing conditions are, like how much space and the
Mhm.
soil and temperatures and water and fertility and weeds and pests? Like, what's everything that you're dealing with on the ground when you're actually growing your crop?
Oh yeah, so we have a tough clay soil where I'm at in North Carolina, like a grayish clay. It's got good mineral content. It's low in nitrogen. We do till it up, and I do pamper my plants with some deep rows. But I've been experimenting some with like shallower rows or just planting flat in the ground to see how plants do in those conditions. But a lot of the production plants, I do give them a nice 6 inches of looser soil with some or something added to it. I've been recently expanded into my parents' pasture and heavy weed pressure. Last year, I tried using those like plastic weed barriers, but I didn't like it very much, and I didn't like the feel of it. It just didn't feel good to me, and I didn't like. It was a mess. You had to put them down, you have to take them up, and this year, I just raked leaves out of the woods,
Mm.
and we mow the grass anyway, so I just took the raked leaves out of the woods and used the grass clippings and mulched all my basils that way. And they're doing great. I didn't even hardly fertilize them this year. And between all the mulch I put on them, they're doing fantastic.
Just a quick aside, have you ever noticed that, and this is something I've seen, but I'm wondering if you've seen it too, when you use mulch of hardwood leaf trees,
Mhm.
it seems to make annual weedy weeds like grass and stuff just kind of give up. Like they just don't like being around
Yeah, I
it.
didn't see as much grass. No,
Yeah.
I saw like some thistles, and we have like a thistle and what's called dog fennel, and some other weeds that I don't know the names of. I'm not too good on I know them by look, but I just don't know the names of things. I'm a very artisanal farmer, so to speak. I'm a scientist by training, but my farming is very artisanal.
Even I have
Yeah, I
weeds that I
didn't
don't know
notice
the
much
name of.
grass. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
The grass was not as much grass. There was the other weeds, but very little grass coming through the oak leaf and or pine. There was a mixture of oak leaves and maple and some pine needles.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting you've seen something similar, but it just kind of makes particularly grass kind of give up the will
Yeah,
to live. Like it's almost expecting the tree to come back and kick it out.
yeah, maybe I don't know.
So how much space? Like you mentioned a bit before we started, like you're growing like a
Yeah,
thousand plants at a time.
yeah. So my parents have 12 acres. About three to four of that is below the water level of the pond. Part of that's taken up by the orchard and the garden. Those 1,000 plants this year are on between an eighth and a quarter of an acre.
Hmm.
So, yeah, so it's not that much space to get my 1,000 plants. I have them packed in pretty tight. I don't. I was, I was expecting that I was going to have to pull a bunch of plants this year, but after saving seeds for my robust plants last year, like this year, they're just like super troopers, and like I only had to pull like a couple for maybe some viral diseases, and but other than that, they're all just chugging along, doing great.
Do you have to irrigate much?
Not too much. We do have a pond. We did have a drought for a little while. We went about a month without rain. I had to irrigate a couple times. I just give them a deep soak, and it's just gravity fed irrigation. I just move the hose one by one, give them a deep soak. But with the mulch on there, it stays the water stays in the ground pretty long, and they're crossed. A lot of my hybrids are crossed with this wild East African basil, so they have pretty robust genetics in there to get them through tough times like that. And
And do you direct sow, or are you still starting in pots and trays and then transplanting?
I do some of both. A lot of them were transplanted, but for breeding, I'll do some direct sowing to try to select for plants that really do well in the local soil. You just look for the seedlings that are really shooting up above the others. And
Hmm.
uh, I did a lot of transplanting from my Ethiopian basils, which perform amazing in all sorts of conditions. A very, very good, very flavorful too. Basil, very just awesome basil. It has a deep taproot I was like trying to dig up the direct sowed one, the seedlings to transplant. I was like, I could barely get deep enough to get the whole root out of the ground. I was like, wow, these things are wild. These the root just shooting down in the ground.
Well, direct sowing definitely makes a big difference for that root
Yeah,
structure. It allows them to
yeah.
create exactly the structure they need without interruption. What about pests and diseases? Because I know basil's got a couple of, at least commercial basil has a couple of major weaknesses on that front these days.
Oh yeah, the downy mildew is just horrendous. This funny thing, I never had downy mildew until I started trying to do some basil farming. And I was in Naperville, Illinois. I grew a little plot in a community garden to just for try to sell some at the local farmers market. And we had a period of rain and got hit by the downy mildew. It's a very depressing disease for a basil farmer. I moved back to North Carolina, first year back, downy mildew. Second year back, downy mildew. I had to pull like 70% of my plants. But this year, haven't seen it yet. Last year, I saved seeds from all the survivors from the plague, and they've all been crossed in with this more or less immune plant from East Africa, and they're chugging along just great this year.
I get the impression that the downy mildew problem emerged relatively recently in the sweet basils that have probably been inbred and pushed to such extremes and grown
Yeah,
intensively for so long that it was almost
yeah.
inevitable that something was going to emerge.
Well, downy mildew comes from Africa. It was first identified in Uganda. But I think it's been there for a long time because most African varieties I grow have at least some decent resistance to downy mildew, and from a very wide geographic spread. Like I was very surprised. Like they said, it came from Uganda, but I grew a basil from Ghana recently, and it was more or less immune to downy mildew. So downy mildew has probably been around in Africa for a long time. The Ethiopian is not immune, but it required very heavy disease pressure and ideal conditions for it to start appearing on the plant. Then there you have then all the breeders are using like this Marani basil. Rutgers uses Marani from Zanzibar, which is immune to downy mildew. A very interesting basil. It's great flavor. It has awesome look. These wild curly leaves to it. Highly recommended if people can get the seeds to try the Marani. It was Rico Check from Strictly Medicinal Seeds. If you know who he is, I don't know if you've heard of Strictly Medicinal Seeds.
I think I've heard the name, but yeah,
Yeah,
I'll have to check them out more.
he first brought the seeds to the West. I think in Australia you could get Marani from what's the name of there's a plant breeder in Australia I follow on Instagram that does a crazy hybridization.
It sounds like
What
it's someone I need to find.
let me look it up. Herbalistic. Search
Oh yeah,
herbalistics.
I know that guy. I know that
Oh,
guy.
you do know that guy.
Yeah. I was about to suggest him, and I'm like, no, it couldn't
Uh,
be.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, oh, that's good to
herbalistic.
know. That's good to know. I'll have to follow up and check that out. Because yeah, he's working on multiple things, so
Yeah,
it doesn't surprise me. Do you suspect that the remaining mechanisms for downy mildew resistance could be broken by industrial basil production if they're just kind of taken from the populations one by one?
I don't know. They say that there's pathogen evolution of the downy mildew, but I feel like the African varieties have been fighting it for so long that the genetics they have is robust enough that I think they're fighting this futile effort to try to breed Genovese basil to be resistant. It's the most susceptible, and it's only a quirk of history that people are so obsessed with Genovese. The Italians don't even want you to call it Genovese if you're not growing it in Genovese, and everyone's trying to grow so the Italians don't want you to call it Genovese unless it's coming from Genovese. Everyone else in the world's trying to grow Italian, but it really just comes down to the early history of industrial agriculture in the U.S. Basil wasn't that popular in the U.S., and then as soon as it did become popular, the one basil they were growing was Genovese.
Hmm.
So everyone kind of followed suit, and everyone now thinks if they think basil in their head, they picture Italian basil. And it's like no. Basil is like that's not even that's like a tiny sliver of basil. Basil is like this wildly diverse plant. I mean, most biologists I
It's
talk to
similar
when you
to Oh, sorry. If it's similar to if people had only ever eaten a bell pepper and they're like, "Oh, I really
Yeah,
like chili," and you're like, "No, they're like complete. They're the same species,
yeah,
but they're completely different end use."
yeah. I mean, like most biologists I talk to, when you mention a simum to them, they're just like, yeah, a simum is just wild. It's a very intent, like just the genome is just all over the place. Genomes, I should say. A simum's a genus, so the a variety of genomes. And uh, yeah, my pet peeve, if I joke about if I hear someone mention, Italian basil or Genovese, I'm just gonna. Oh man, I mean, it's not that it's that bad. I mean, it just there's just so much more out there. It's just you're really limiting yourself, and it's just futile to pamper these plants, put sunscreen on them. You have to grow. It doesn't even handle this intense sun when you get too far towards the equator. Like in North Carolina, Genovese or the Italian types will get sunburn in July and August if you don't. And that's why people grow them in partially shaded greenhouses. It gets the downy mildew the worst. It's
Yeah,
the most
yeah,
susceptible variety.
yeah. And you're setting up the perfect conditions for the downy mildew to like just rip through it.
Yeah, and Rutgers has spent millions and millions of dollars in government money. And I grew Rutgers last year, and their varieties still get the downy mildew.
Mm.
They're only like partially resistant.
Oh, do you suspect there's any link between plant nutrition and the downy mildew? That like if you try and grow the crop really fast with lots of nitrogen and extra fertilizer, that sets it up to be more susceptible, that it's not
I don't
just
know. I'm not.
genetic.
I couldn't speak to that because I've only experienced it in my conditions here in the field, and it could be. I'm not sure. I know it's hard for me to say because I don't have cultures of downy mildew to do it. Like I just get the spores that like in the U.S. they actually overwinter in Florida and they blow through the atmosphere up north. So starting in spring, they just slowly work the spores just slowly work their way up from Florida up the east coast. So it's just a random chance of when they're gonna hit.
So with your basil breeding project, what are your main priorities? Like what traits are you trying to bring out?
So one of our focuses is ornamental pollinators. One reason I always grew so much basil was my dad's a beekeeper, and in North Carolina there's a low nectar flow in the late season, and we would plant a ton of basil because basil flowers in the late season, and we just it just brings us joy to go out in the basil and see the wild bees, the moths, the insects, the honeybees too. The bumblebees love it. So we're breeding these ornamental pollinators. They're also tasty. They have a variety of tasty flavors. So early in the season when they're vegetating, you can eat them. And the flowers are good. The flowers make the best tea. So you can harvest the flowers, make your basil tea, like me if you like that. I'm also into breeding. I'm at a war with this downy mildew. I just want to have plants completely resistant to this. I have that's my beekeeper lines. So what's interesting, there's going to be two lines I'll talk about: my beekeeper and my alien innovation, and they're closely related. But it was something I just learned recently is how in biology, and I kind of relate this to physics too, how A cross B doesn't equal B cross A.
Hmm.
So if I take like this,
Non-commutative.
yeah, non-commutative, and in physics, that's like quantum mechanics. A cross B doesn't equal B cross A, and it's the same in biology. So it's really, I think it's a cool thing. So like my beekeeper is a basilicum basil pollinated with this. I could go on for a long time about this one basil because there's a lot of misconception about it that I've been doing a lot of research. It was misnamed as an Indian basil, but Rico Check from Strictly Medicinal Seeds has determined that it's actually a wild East African basil. And most people in the U.S. think it's actually the Indian basil, and I've shown the pictures to my Indian friends. They're like, no, that's not the Indian basil. It's not Krishna or Ramna, which are a tenuiflorum simum. This one from East Africa is a Simum africanum, which is a natural hybrid that occurred in the wild between Basilicum and Americanum. So basil naturally hybridizes itself in the wild. So my beekeeper is a Basilicum cross this wild East African, but my alien invasion, meaning when I say the Basilicum first, I save the seeds from the Basilicum. So it's the seed bearing. But the alien invasion is the seeds saved from the Africanum cross the Basilicum. So they have very different character to them. They're similar crosses, but the end character is very different. And I call it alien invasion because the plant just didn't seem to want to die from anything. Like you didn't water it; it just like it would droop. The leaves would droop down, and it would look dead. And then you put some water on it, it would rain and rain and rain. No disease, no nothing. Didn't get the mildew. And this year I trialed them in poor soil. Didn't hardly feed them. The drought came. I gave them like a little sprinkle of water. The leaves started yellowing, and as soon as they got rain, they just right back to life. So kind of alien, and so to speak.
So with the beekeeper line, I think on
Yeah.
you've got a really good YouTube channel with lots of little videos
Yeah.
of growing. I'd recommend people check it out. You were talking about selecting for plants that continue flowering like right up
Yeah.
to the end of the
So,
season.
so the plants are a little bit like the basilicum. They have like tender leaves, and some of them do. There's a range. Some of them lean towards the africanum, but I'm trying to get them so they're like a basilicum, tender leaves that you can eat, culinary, but they just keep vegetating and flowering and flowering. Most basilicums, when they start to flower, the plant will stop vegetating and stop. It'll just finish with those flowers, and it'll kind of just start senescing and dying.
They
So
kind
I'm
of flower
selecting.
themselves to death.
Yeah. So the beekeeper, a lot of them, what's really interesting about the interspecies hybrid basils, you'll get these characteristics that neither of the parents had. Like some of them will have like ended flowers, like the flower just wants to keep getting longer and longer and longer. And they turn into these brambles, which is exactly what we're looking for. And some of the beekeepers I had this year, like I thought they were about done. I was like worried they were going to start dying. Then I went out and looked at them. I'm like, oh, they're starting to re-veg and they're putting out more flowers. Great. That's exactly what I was looking for.
Do any of those respond well to being cut back? Do they get like a second flush?
Yeah, you can cut them back and they'll keep going. But a lot of a typical basilicum, there's only so many times you can do it.
Yeah.
It keeps that memory that it was flowering. And that's why cloning, people talk, you see these hyped up YouTube videos of like grow basil for infinite supply of basil. It's like, no, you can't keep cloning a basilicum basil, seeded basilicum basil. Eventually the plant keeps that memory and it's going to know how old it is. And
Yeah.
your clone is just going to flower immediately. And
I don't know about you, but I actually like having seasonal production of different crops.
yeah.
Like to have an abundance of something and then miss it when it's gone and really look
Yeah,
forward to
yeah,
it
that's
coming
true.
back.
Yeah,
The idea of having a non-stop supply of something, I'm like, oh
yeah.
no.
I'm actually about basil right now. Like I've been eating so many types of basil or basil, if you want to say. I'm like, yeah, I need a little bit of a break. Like there's only so many like dishes, and I try to experiment with all the varieties and stuff, but eventually, after a little bit of a break, you get like you said, you start craving it again, and you get the new cycle.
Well, do you think there's any potential for breeding more ornamental characteristics into the beekeeper line? That people could use it as a garden plant as much as like a herb or a vegetable garden plant?
Yeah, I mean that's what I want the line to be. It's a diverse seed mix that gives you. I want to show, bring the joy of the diversity of the basil, Asymum genus to people. So the beekeeper is meant to be. They're all going to be more or less. Maybe a rare one won't flower heavy, but they're all going to flower heavy. But you're going to get this range of interesting flavors, smells, aromas, looks. I want them to more or less lean towards the tender leaves so people can, use them for their food.
Hmm.
And then, yeah. And back to what you're saying, one of the goals of breeding I have a couple that I'm trying to inbreed. I have a couple, like I have a lemon cross cinnamon, which is kind of like a heirloom I've been working on. I call it linneman. It's special because when I met my wife, her name was Lena, and she saw this jar of basil called linneman, and she's like, she thought I did it on purpose. I was like, no.
That's lovely.
Yeah,
The reason why I ask about the ornamental angle
yeah.
is I believe there's blue flowered African basil species. Or am I mixing up my thoughts here?
There's this one called African blue, and it's another pet peeve of mine that it's overly famous. It's more famous than it should be because there's a lot more potential out there. It's a cross of Asimum kilimandasharkarum, a species of Asimum from East Africa, obviously near the Kilimanjaro region,
Hmm.
and with a opal basil. So it's not a pure African basil. It's crossed with a basilicum. But there's a lot. It's actually one of my goals to do a triple cross interspecies hybrid. So I want to do I want to see if it's possible to do a Kilimanjaro cross a basilicum cross a africanum. If we could do a triple species hybrid, just to see if it's possible and what kind of funky characteristics would result. But that one is almost sterile. But I've heard reports from a breeder that you can get it to produce some seeds by back pollinating with the Kilimanjaro. A whole nother discussion about like sometimes of getting the fertility up in these hybrid basils. Usually the first generation, you have to really hunt for the seeds, and then you plant them again, and it takes a couple of years to get the fertility going.
That's
But
cool with hybrids though.
yeah, yeah, that one I don't know if it's actually really that blue. I actually have one I breeding called Williamsburg blue that the leaves itself I'm breeding to have a high level of blue pigment. Like you make a tea with it, and it has like a sapphire blue tea.
Oh wow. That's
So but
amazing.
it's taken me some time to do the selection to maybe 10-20% of the plants have it, and I have to pull them. This year I have planted ones that I selected that have the blue pigment. I'm inbreeding them, but it's a work in progress.
That's amazing. What other amazing little things on the side you're doing apart from the major projects? Like, are there other weird characteristics that you've picked out from all of the diversity that you've
uh
assembled that looks like it has potential?
the one you talk about medicinal, the one thing I would like to do that would push the limits of that. So where do the medicinal aspects come from? They come from the essential oils.
Hmm.
What's the easiest way you can see the trichomes are where the essential oils are, right? Some of it is
Hmm.
in the leaf material, but the trichomes are, where. So I would love to see pushed basil to where it looks like a modern cannabis plant. You see a basil flower, and it's just like just like a powder in the sun, like it's
Yeah.
just covered in thick. It's not really, they're not resinous. They're more powdery trichomes.
Hmm.
Uh, but just they sparkle. Actually, they have a sparkle character. That's how I try to select for. I'll put them up in the sun and twist them to try to find the ones that have the most trichomes. But it could be a long time. The problem I'm having is that too enthusiastic, and basil is such an outbreeder that my basils cross so much. It's hard to do enough inbreeding. But I do try to select for ones that have, like I found one this year that had abnormally large trichomes. I'm calling Stardust. I'm saving seeds from that one.
Hmm.
Some efforts in that direction. So
It's the eternal trade-off between like doing one
yeah,
thing obsessively really well,
yeah,
but having diversity and being open to other opportunities.
yeah,
And when you bring, well, that's something I want to talk about is, but when you bring so much diversity in a genus together, there's so many possibilities that kind of leap out at you. How did you go about gathering your genetic diversity for all of this work? Like what were the strategies and the methods that
At,
you used?
at first, it was the main big seeding companies. Really, it's hours online, just looking for seed companies. Recently, I've usually ends up the people who have the some of the coolest stuff are obscure. The bigger ones have the more mainstream stuff, and so that's how I started. I was breeding with like Genovese and opal basil and lemon basil. It's kind of standard commercial cultivars. And I just gradually added more. Throw some Thai in there, and then recently I've really found some good companies that have had some cool stuff. And then now as a professional breeder, that I actually have a company, I can access the National Germplasm Repository,
Mm-hmm.
so I can order seeds. But they still only have a small bit of what's out there. Like, I mean, there is. You talk about like Africa, there's like so much. I read some papers from Ethiopia. They were like analyzing like 40 local strains of sweet basil in Ethiopia. Uh, I personally believe that it's highly probable that Simum basilicum probably came from East Africa, considering it's known that the Simum, the genus, came from Africa. I mean, if you look, who was the Russian scientist who said if you find the locus, if you plot it and you find the locus of the genus and you can kind of locate, it's definitely the genus came from Africa. And most of the stuff online says sweet basil came from India, but it just doesn't make sense because India doesn't grow that many sweet basils.
Mm.
They're more into Tenuiflorum in India. They don't really grow much basilicum, but in East Africa, basilicum is like really popular. Most people don't even know that.
Mm.
Like Ethiopia, it's like a very popular herb. Uh, I've been growing basil for years and years and years. I only learned it like 2 years ago.
Ethiopia is such a strange center of crop domestication. Like they've got so many
Yeah,
interesting crops that are grown there that nobody else knows about. And I've found it to be quite impenetrable, like getting access to and contact with people in that area. They don't seem to be as connected to the rest of the world as even like West and South Africa.
yeah,
They're their own little universe, which I find intriguing and exciting, and I kind of respect it too.
yeah.
Now, as you've been moving along, like basils are naturally outbreeding, but have you considered or started doing any hand pollination to generate small amounts of seed of particular crosses, or do you just do it opportunistic?
I love that's my style. There was one time I did some like hand breeding, but the hand pollinate basil is like so difficult. Like it just, but I do, what I do is control proximity. So I do it in a probabilistic sense. Like I,
Hmm.
make these closer to that one. And so I do try to control proximity. So there is some effort there. And I started doing some like isolation where I'm using smaller pots where I like put some farther away, and then I'll put a couple plants that I want to inbreed in one pot, and they're separated from the rest of the plants. So I'm starting to try to do crosses that way. I'm still letting the pollinators do it, but control it through isolation and proximity.
Do you have any methods for screening for hybrid seedlings from the plants that you're hoping to get hybrids from? Like, do you mass sow the seeds and then look for ones with unusual leaf patterns or colors or something like that?
It's virtually impossible if you're dealing with already deeply hybridized seeds,
Hmm.
unless it takes some doing, unless you crossed with something that wasn't in the mix originally, like had a different leaf shape, or you had a green seed line and you cross with purple. That's one of the easiest ones. If you're doing green and purple and you see a purple seedling, like I grew some Ethiopians this year, and I've so real quick, one thing I've learned: if you grow high basils in a dense population, you'll get about, from a plant, about 50% inbred and 50% hybrids. Like if you put a basil plant and you surrounded it by a bunch of other ones, you're going to get about 50 inbred and 50 hybrids. That's my rule of thumb I'm working with now, from just counting the hybrids in some of my seeds from the plants. But like my Ethiopians, I planted them, and the first thing I could spot, oh, there's a purple one. It wasn't until later I could figure out some of the green ones were hybrids too. Once they started growing, and I was smelling them and saw the growth of them. But yeah, the purple could be like a tag to. I mean, you could look for leaf shape if you're starting out with a pure one. Like soon, I'm going to be looking at I have a Zambian basil. I got it from a seed company, but I'm pretty sure they got it from the germplasm repository. Zambia country loaded with basils. It's an Americanum, which can hybridize with Basilicum, or Africanum, which Africanum is already a hybrid of Basilicum. The funny thing is, if you get a new hybrid, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the same thing as Africanum, because it could hybridize and stabilize to a new chromosome number. So you don't know
Yeah.
what you could get something new than Africanum.
Sometimes I suspect it's hybrids all the way down. That
Yeah,
our lovely Darwinian branching kind of family trees that we
yeah,
like to draw, that it's probably missing, that it's just been a total kind of scrambled mess the whole way.
yeah. That's true.
And I was going to say too that your approach of encouraging hybridization and being on the lookout for interesting variations that suggest an interesting hybrid's happened, I think that has a lot of advantages over doing the really hyper-controlled hand hybridization and then forcing whatever seeds you get to grow, regardless of
Yeah.
how vigorous they are, to reach
Hmm.
maturity, because you're always selecting for vigor. Like a
Yeah.
new hybrid has to stand on its own merits. It doesn't get
Hmm.
like a special pass in life because it has a probable hybrid origin. It has to be as strong as the parent generations at least.
Well, you're selecting for ones the pollen could actually fit down the tube, and if you try to do it by hand, you might be just doing a futile thing, because the pollen might not even fit down the, what do you call the tube in a plant? Like, I don't even know
Oh,
some of
down the
these
pistil,
terms.
yeah, the pollen tubes need
Yeah,
to be right. Like,
yeah,
well, as a counterexample, I did some hand crossing of salvia, which is in the same
yeah,
family. Chia, the one, the salvia they use
yeah.
for seed production. And yeah, I was hand pollinating chia pollen onto a whole bunch of other ornamental salvias that I just happened to have around. And half of them didn't set at all. And the ones that did set, they might have been self-pollinated, they might have been outcrossed. I'm growing the seeds out now, but I only got like, 5 seeds out of hours and hours and hours of
Mhm.
work of going back and
Yeah.
pollinating each one every day. And yeah, I still might be lucky to get one of those that's actually a genuine hybrid. And whether it's vigorous or not, who knows? So yeah, it's a peculiar kind of hobby for a particular kind of psychology, I
Yeah,
think. You have to be
yeah.
the right kind of person to want to do that kind of thing with your time.
With basil, the most interesting plants you're going to find, you get one hybridization. Say you get the first hybridization, and you get a pretty cool plant, but it's nearly sterile, and you that has some rare seeds. Those are going to be the seeds that are going to give you like the really cool stuff.
Yeah.
That's what I found in basil. That those seeds are like the prize seeds. That you get that one cool plant, and then it's like producing like, there was one last year I called Star of the Sea. That it actually partially came from a name suggested to me. Someone said call it Marlene, but Marlene means Star of the Sea, so I called it Star of the Sea. And I looked for hours and hours and got like 20 seeds.
Mhm.
I've only planted a couple of them. The darn ants ate one of them, but those seeds will give you the most variable plants you'll experience. Like, just completely unexpected. You don't even know what to expect out of those seeds. Like, it just, uh,
That's
yeah.
the
So
magic of the F2 generation.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
I'm curious too. I want to drive the podcast a little bit towards focusing on how people can come together to collaborate on plant breeding projects too. So I
Mhm.
want to spend a little bit of time talking about like how do you share your work with other people to like because like just you're producing like probably hundreds of times more seed that you could grow out all of it. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you have collaborators, other people who are interested who do some of the grow outs of that high variability stuff and just let you know if anything interesting
Uh,
appears?
so I do sell seeds. I am trying, to, I will admit, I'm trying to make some money with what I'm doing. I'm fairly generous in the amount of seeds I give, and I encourage people, once they get my seeds, to save the seeds, from the generations, from what they get. So I have, I'm in contact with different people. I also sell clones to people of some of the plants, and I'm in contact with a fair number of people, discussing, talking to them about basil, what to do, how to grow basil. I have some person down in Florida that is really into basil, and we're always discussing it, possible hybrids, what could be next. And I just sent him a batch of the Zambian seeds, and we're excited about what could come out of those because they were growing right next to my main breeding plot. And so we could get something really exotic out of these seeds. And the Zambian was really had an interesting flavor itself. It went great with fish, but we're really excited. So yeah, I have different people on social media that I communicate with, just talking basil, how to grow basil, how to do this, how to do that, how to use basil, what different basils, what foods they go good with, and cultivation strategies and seed saving strategies and all sorts of stuff.
Are there any peculiarities for basil with seed saving? Is it just the usual make it dry enough and keep it cool and stable? Or
Uh,
are there other quirks?
for most of the time, I actually have been breeding basil. I wouldn't even process them out of the pods. I would just have these big clusters, and I would direct sow into my garden. I would do seedling beds. I would transplant. Sometimes I wouldn't. Sometimes I would just have this. I would weed. I would thin out and leave the. I would have a dense bed. I would get a lot of plants by growing a dense bed. But for many of the years when I was doing it as a hobby, I would just have a big bundle of the seed pods, and I would just go out there and rub them onto the dirt. It's only now that I'm trying to sell the seeds that I process them out of the heads. Yeah, in the last 2 years is the only time I've actually tried to. I actually process them out of the, what do you call them? The
The calyxes.
yeah, the calyxes. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. I wonder if the residual aromatics in the seed heads actually helps protect the seed from any pest pressure.
probably you can tell the essential oil changes as the seed matures. It you get a different aroma. I'm pretty sure whatever it's producing towards the end of maturity is there to help protect the seed. Of course, it eventually drops out into the dirt, but whatever is there at the end is to help protect the seed, the ripening seed.
Mhm. We should
And then
probably start. Oh,
earlier
sorry.
on, I
Sorry, you
just
go.
thinking earlier on that the plant is trying to attract the pollinators, so you get the sweet aromas, and then later on you get the pollination is done, it's changing to something else, and it must be to protect the ripening seeds. Yeah.
Interesting. We should probably hit the bonus round questions because I could
Okay.
chat to you all day about basil. I'm utterly
Yeah.
inspired to reassess what I can do with this genus myself. So, bonus round questions. If you could work wonders with any species, like there's no limit to time or resources, you can live 1,000 years if you want to. What would you create? And it doesn't have to be basil, but if you want to talk more basil, that's fine too.
My joke, it's kind of a tongue in cheek, but I would breed basil until it's sentient. So,
You're
but some
assuming
people
it
already
isn't
believe.
already sentient.
Yeah, some people do already believe basil is sentient. So, I'm just behind the curve, I guess. Yeah. So yeah, breed basil until it walks out of the pot. Yeah.
I love that answer. Now, a broader question. What is your vision for the future of food in your community? Like that's a pretty open-ended question. Just curious to see how people think their breeding work can contribute to like how the whole community
I
deals with food.
love variety of flavors and forms, and I would love to drive down my street and see gardens everywhere, people saving seeds, local cultivars that are adapted to the region and environment. Uh, just good old fashioned agriculture. Save your seeds, put them back in the dirt. See what happens, and save what you find is tasty. What makes you feel good. People sharing their excess crop with their neighbor, their friends, that type of thing. That's what I would love to see.
I could just imagine like every little town has its own strain of basil with like a completely different flavor. But
Oh yeah,
going on a trip would be such an adventure. Like if
oh yeah.
every town would have like a different aroma to it.
Oh, that's for the genome is there. It could happen. That's for sure.
And people like you bringing all of that deep diversity in, so it's not
Yeah,
just Genovese basil everywhere.
yeah.
That's what
That's what
makes
I
it
like to
possible.
think our company is doing. It's kind of like a basil breeder starter kit. Here you go. Here's some
Yeah,
diverse seeds. Plant them. Pick the one you like. Save them, and get going. That's
yeah,
kind of what I,
exactly. Exactly. So how do you hope to pass your work on to future generations?
you know, partially, by selling my seeds, encouraging people to save their own seeds. Uh, Educating, leaving, I do my social media, along with, you know, the business side of what I do. I try to just do a lot of education about basil and, the varieties around the world. And so hopefully that information and that knowledge, will be passed on to the future. And it's out there in the digital realm. Who knows how long that'll last? But at least in people's minds, hopefully it'll continue on. Just open people's eyes to the sheer, you know, diversity of the Simum genus.
And what would you say to people who are thinking about getting into crop breeding, but they're kind of just hesitating on the borderline of jumping in?
Why not? I mean, all you have to do is save some seeds and throw them back in the dirt, and it's exciting. You can produce a cultivar that is adapted to your local environment and new flavors, new forms. It's not always perfect. You don't always get something you want. That's part of the fun. So have seeds I save from peppers, and I don't really breed them. I notice occasionally I get a hybrid, but usually they're tasty. It's not exactly the same variety, but you can still use them. They're tasty. But with basil, it's very rare that there's not a at least palatable hybrid basil. It might not be ideal, but almost all of them are aromatic and tasty to some extent. It's very, very, very rare to find one that's like, ugh, like don't want to eat that.
Okay, and your final end plug opportunity, how can people learn more about what you're doing and get in touch and hopefully buy seed from you too?
Just search Basically About Basil. You'll find us on Instagram, Facebook, and then our website. Or you can email me at jason.howard@basicallyaboutbasil.com. I'm always down for a chat on basil and happy to share any extra information you want to.
Brilliant. So I'll put all of those links in the show notes, and thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Talk basil all day.